Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the shadowed stone walls of a medieval palace. Flickering candlelight dances on tapestries, incense curls through cold corridors, and somewhere in the distance the quiet sob of a queen echoes behind a locked door. You don't walk through this place. You're escorted. Your every move is watched, and as much as the golden crown on your head gleams for the world to admire, you feel the iron underneath pressing against your scalp. There's no comfort in this power, no peace in the throne you sit on. Just obligation, danger, and the constant knowledge that the walls have ears. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together, here on Timeless Sleep. You're young, maybe 14, and you've just been told you're getting married. You don't know the man, of course. He's a king, or soon to be one, and you're a pawn in a larger plan stitched together by uncles, bishops, and whispers in candlelit chapels. Your mother fixes your hair, your nurse weeps behind a curtain. You ride toward your new home in a creaking carriage, flanked by soldiers who are there to protect you, or ensure you don't run. When you arrive, you're not greeted as a bride. You're weighed like gold. The court watches every tilt of your head. You smile too much. They call you frivolous. You stay quiet. They say you're cold. Somewhere behind those watchful stares, someone is already writing the first line of your future scandal. For medieval queens, power came not as a gift, but as a burden, and that burden began the moment you were born into a noble lineage. Your blood was your currency, your body, the royal treasury. You were expected to produce heirs, maintain alliances, soothe your husband's ego, and never, ever step out of line, even though that line moved constantly and was drawn by hands that didn't include yours. Some queens tried to play the game. They learned to smile with calculation, to flatter their enemies, and to wield their beauty like a blade. Others simply survived, enduring humiliations you wouldn't wish on anyone. Marriage wasn't about love. It was about treaties, land, trade, or simply silencing a rival bloodline. And once married, your life belonged to the crown, not just metaphorically, but legally. You couldn't leave, you couldn't refuse, you couldn't even grieve in peace if it risked making your husband look weak. Let's take Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was no passive figure, heiress to vast lands, married first to the King of France, then to the King of England. She tried to carve her own path in a world that wanted her only as a prize. She accompanied her first husband on the Second Crusade, not as a docile shadow, but as a woman who commanded respect. Yet whispers followed her, of affairs, of power plays, of inappropriate freedoms, the kind of stories that cling to a queen long after they've stopped being true. Historians still argue whether Eleanor truly led troops dressed as an Amazon, or whether that was just the church's way of discrediting a woman who dared act with authority. Either way, she spent years imprisoned by her second husband after supporting her sons in rebellion. A queen, locked away by the very king who once knelt for her. She was crowned, and then caged. Now imagine Catherine of Valois, the young bride of Henry V, a French princess sent to marry the English king after a brutal war. Her wedding was less a celebration and more a victory lap for her new husband. Henry died young, leaving Catherine a widow at barely 20. And what did she do? She dared, yes, dared, to fall in love again, with a Welsh clerk, Owen Tudor. Their secret marriage wasn't just scandalous, it was dangerous. If the wrong people found out, it could have meant execution. Catherine was a queen dowager, and by law she couldn't remarry without the king's permission, a rule made specifically to keep her womb under royal control. A child of hers might carry blood that could threaten the crown, but she took the risk, and because of her defiance she became the grandmother of Henry VII, founder of the Tudor dynasty. Without her scandal, there would be no Elizabeth throne, no Shakespearean court, no golden age of England. Of course, not all queens found love in their cages. Some were shackled to monsters. Isabella of France, wife of Edward II, knew this well. Edward preferred the company of his male favourites, lavishing them with power while ignoring his wife. Isabella was mocked, sidelined, and eventually exiled. But she didn't go quietly. She returned with an army and overthrew her husband, allegedly overseeing his brutal death. The details too grim to whisper here. Some say she ruled through her son afterward, cloaked in velvet and vengeance. Others see her as a villain, a cold, power-hungry woman who committed treason. But if your husband humiliated you, if your voice was silenced, your crown hollow, what would you do? Historians still debate her true motives, but one thing's certain. She didn't accept her cage. The cage came in many forms. For some, it was a literal prison. For others, it was a gilded court where every word had to be weighed, every glance calculated. You couldn't confide in friends. They might be spies. You couldn't cry in public. Grief was weakness. You couldn't eat too much or too little. You couldn't gain weight or lose it. Your body, your emotions, your loyalty, they were all scrutinized because you were not really a person. You were a symbol, a chess piece with a crown. And if you ever dared step out of that role, if you flirted too freely, danced too late, or laughed too loudly, the court would turn. Rumours would blossom like mould. The phrase, "she's not acting like a queen," could destroy you faster than any blade. Even childbirth wasn't yours to control. It happened in public. The Queen's birthing chamber was crowded with courtiers, midwives, bishops, and ladies-in-waiting, all there to witness that the baby truly came from your body and not smuggled in, swapped, or forged. Your pain was spectacle, your body a theatre. You could die giving birth, and still the gossip would be about whether the baby looked enough like the king. And when you couldn't give birth, oh, that was the worst crime of all. Infertility was a death sentence in slow motion. Even if the issue lay with your husband, you bore the blame. Queens who failed to produce sons were often set aside, exiled, or sent to convents. Some were poisoned, others simply vanished from the records, erased like ink wiped from parchment. But sometimes queens fought back. Some found power in patronage, surrounding themselves with scholars, artists, and loyalists. Others turned to the church, wielding piety like a shield. And some played the long game. They smiled, they obeyed, and behind the scenes they plotted, waiting, watching, learning how to survive. Every queen had her secrets, and often it wasn't sin that undid them. It was the perception of sin, a look held too long, a letter burned too late, a servant who talked, a priest who listened too closely. In a world that demanded queens be perfect, even perfection could look suspicious. So you learn to be silent, to breathe softly, to play dumb while memorizing everyone's weakness. You sleep with one eye open, because you wear the crown, but everyone else holds the key to your fate. And yet even in the darkest chambers of those castles, some queens dreamed. They dreamed of books, of gardens, of secret letters under pillows, of kisses that weren't part of treaties. They dreamed of being more than someone's prize. They dreamed of escape. Tonight, you are that queen. You feel the weight of expectation, the ache of compromise, the quiet strength it takes to smile when everything inside you is breaking. And as you walk through that cold corridor, torchlight flickering against the walls, you know the truth. The crown you wear isn't made of gold. It's made of silence. And yet you carry it still. You slip quietly through corridors heavy with the scent of lavender and melting wax, your steps cushioned by soft rugs embroidered in threads of gold and crimson. Around you, the palace breathes, quiet, watchful, alive. Behind closed doors, secrets stir gently in the darkness, concealed by painted smiles and delicate courtesies. Every door holds another story. Every smile conceals another whisper. You pause at a curtained alcove, heavy velvet falling silently to hide whatever sins lie beyond. Behind this curtain could be a secret love affair, or a coded message passed carefully between allies, wrapped tight in silk ribbons and buried beneath gentle pleasantries. The queens of the Middle Ages lived their lives constantly watched, yet always found ways to slip beneath notice, their hearts beating fiercely beneath jewelled corsets and layers of silk. In medieval palaces, love wasn't a private matter. It was currency, leverage, something whispered about and carefully recorded. A queen's love was rarely hers alone. It belonged to treaties, royal bloodlines, and political ambition. But human hearts are not easily controlled. Love, like water, always finds its own path, seeping quietly through cracks and crevices, guided by nothing but feeling and hope. Take, for instance, the mysterious case of Queen Marguerite of Burgundy. Married young to Louis X of France, Marguerite found herself surrounded by luxury but starved for affection. Louis was distant, obsessed with his lineage, and coldly uninterested in his young wife's heart. But rumours were enough. Marguerite and her sisters-in-law were accused of secret affairs, meeting lovers in shadowed corners and slipping coded letters through palace halls. It was said their indiscretions took place in an abandoned tower, lit by faint candlelight. Hushed voices drowned beneath the whispers of the wind. Such accusations didn't just scandalise, they toppled kingdoms. Marguerite found herself imprisoned in a stone fortress, where silence became her only companion until her mysterious death. Whether she truly loved another, or if she simply sought comfort from loneliness, we'll never know, but the whispers persist, threaded through centuries like delicate embroidery. And speaking of embroidery, never underestimate the language of the needle. Queens and their attendants mastered subtle methods of communicating forbidden affections. A flower stitched in a certain pattern, colours carefully chosen, initials hidden within elaborate designs. These were the secret love letters of a world where every parchment was examined and every letter intercepted. You imagine the careful fingers of these royal women, pushing needles slowly through fine fabrics, hiding messages of longing beneath pretty petals and intricate vines. Perhaps that violet flower embroidered into a sleeve wasn't merely decorative. It signalled secret longing for a distant night or a hidden rendezvous planned beneath moonlit gardens. Even innocent sewing circles held silent conversations. Smiles exchanged above embroidery frames were often more than polite courtesies. Another queen whose secret heart changed history was Isabella of Angoulême. Married to King John of England when she was barely 12, Isabella's youthful beauty drew both admiration and envy, but John's possessiveness turned her life into a gilded cage. The English court was a hostile place for Isabella, who struggled to find her footing among suspicious nobles and jealous courtiers. After John's death, Isabella finally tasted freedom, only briefly. Her subsequent marriage to Hudic of Lusignan shocked the English nobility, not because of political necessity, but because she married openly for passion. Her choice scandalised society precisely because it was genuine, heartfelt, an act of defiance against a system that viewed marriage purely as a strategic tool. Isabella chose love over convenience, knowing fully the scandal she stirred, yet willing to accept the consequences. Her heart's desire created ripples of outrage, yet to Isabella, such whispers were nothing compared to years spent suffocating under royal expectation. But passion wasn't always romantic. For some queens, love took subtler forms, perhaps even friendship. Eleanor of Provence, Queen to Henry III of England, relied deeply upon her circle of trusted ladies. Her favourites, especially her sister Sanchia, formed a protective network against the harsh judgments and isolation of the English court. Their bond was steadfast, powerful enough to inspire jealousy and suspicion among nobles who viewed female alliances as dangerous. In a palace filled with whispers, such friendships were often misunderstood or deliberately twisted to scandalise the queen. Medieval courts were like theatres. The queen always centre stage, every action scrutinised by noble audiences hungry for scandal. Every innocent glance became potential evidence, every whispered conversation a plot. Innocent friendships were twisted into lurid tales, simple laughter turned suspect, genuine affection demonized as forbidden desire. Queens navigated this maze with cautious skill, knowing one misstep could cost them their reputations or their lives. And perhaps most intriguingly, the queens who best navigated these hidden corridors of affection and ambition left legacies that continue to intrigue scholars centuries later. Some queens, like Anne Boleyn, boldly embraced their desires, defying norms, openly loving, openly fighting for their place. Others, quieter souls like Philippa of Hainault, expressed devotion discreetly, shaping history gently from behind carefully managed smiles and quiet dignity. Each choice carried risk. Each queen knew her life hung constantly upon threads woven by rumour, love, ambition, and secrecy. Tonight, as you linger in the velvet quiet of these imagined halls, you begin to sense the complexity hidden beneath glittering crowns and embroidered gowns. Queens were never mere symbols. They were vibrant, passionate, ambitious women whose hearts beat fiercely beneath layers of gold and silk. Their love, dangerous, secretive, brave, shaped nations, inspired stories, and survived centuries to whisper gently now to you. You take one last glance down these shadowed corridors. Candles flicker gently, curtains ripple in a breath of air, revealing just a glimpse of silk behind closed doors. There, beneath those secret layers of velvet and shadow, beats the heart of a queen. Fierce, longing, human. She whispers quietly, gently, "Remember me, not as a queen, but as a woman who once dared to love." Tonight, you carry her whisper with you, down through centuries into your own heart, where it settles softly and warmly, a gentle reminder that beneath crowns, behind curtains, we are all equally human. You walk quietly through the echoing chambers of the royal apartments, your footsteps muffled by layers of plush carpets. The air here feels thick with expectation, heavy velvet curtains, the faint perfume of lilies, the whispers of attendants discussing preparations behind closed doors. In these rooms, queens became mothers, their roles expanding from mere pawns of statecraft to keepers of royal bloodlines. But motherhood in medieval courts wasn't simply a joyous event. It was a political battlefield, a chess game played with human lives, where children became both the greatest treasures and deepest vulnerabilities. Imagine for a moment yourself seated in a vast chamber lit softly by golden candlelight. You're a queen, and you've just brought a child into the world. You hold this tiny bundle gently in your arms, fragile, impossibly small, yet carrying a burden of expectations heavier than stone. Your joy is tempered by fear, your heart guarded by the unspoken truth that your child isn't entirely yours. From the instant of birth, royal infants belong to kingdoms, churches and councils far more than they ever belonged to their mothers. The birthing chamber was not a private sanctuary but a public theatre, crowded with midwives, courtiers, bishops and even ambassadors. It ensured no fraud could occur. Every cry, every sigh, every whispered word was carefully noted, reported, dissected. A queen's virtue hinged on her ability to deliver healthy heirs. One stillbirth, one sickly child, and your reputation would darken like clouds before a storm. Consider the tale of Anne of Bohemia, queen consort to Richard II of England. Anne was gentle and beloved by many, celebrated for her kindness and grace. Yet, throughout her 12-year marriage, Anne bore no children, a situation that wasn't merely unfortunate but politically catastrophic. Historians still argue whether Anne suffered medical issues, or if Richard himself was infertile. But in a royal court, blame always settled on the Queen. As whispers multiplied, Anne's reputation suffered quietly. Though she remained popular with the common people, behind closed doors, nobles blamed her barrenness for weakening the kingdom's stability. Her gentle heart and sincere love for Richard couldn't protect her from courtly ridicule and quiet accusations whispered behind ornate fans. Contrast Anne's quiet tragedy with Eleanor of Castile, the fiercely devoted queen of Edward I. Eleanor bore Edward an astonishing 16 children, a testament to royal duty and endurance. Yet even motherhood carried bitter sacrifices. Out of 16, only 6 survived infancy. Imagine the silent grief behind Eleanor's composed facade, the heartbreak carefully hidden beneath embroidered gowns and royal dignity. Each lost child was mourned briefly, then quietly set aside. The Queen expected to recover swiftly, present a brave front and try again. Her pain was deemed irrelevant to the kingdom's ambitions. She was praised as a successful mother, a prolific queen. Yet who considered her sorrow as she watched so many little coffins lowered into royal crypts? For medieval queens, every pregnancy was fraught with danger, both physical and political. A queen who produced too many daughters risked whispers of inadequacy, her worth diminished by the lack of sons. Daughters could seal alliances, but sons held kingdoms together. Failure to provide a male heir might send a queen spiralling into disgrace or exile. Even if the queen was beloved, respected and admired, her womb was always judged more harshly than her character. Take Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's long-suffering first wife. Catherine gave birth repeatedly, suffering miscarriage after miscarriage, stillbirth after stillbirth, managing to produce only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary. Henry, desperate for a male heir, blamed Catherine openly, humiliating her publicly and privately. Catherine, fiercely proud, refused to accept blame or surrender quietly. She endured public ridicule, betrayal and abandonment, holding tightly to her dignity even as her marriage disintegrated. Historians still debate whether Catherine's medical struggles might have been worsened by the emotional cruelty inflicted by Henry, or if her repeated losses were mere tragic fate. But one thing remains clear: motherhood was Catherine's crown and her cage, her greatest strength and her deepest wound. Queens often had little say in their children's upbringing. Royal children were frequently removed from their mothers at shockingly young ages, placed under the care of wet nurses, governesses, or noble guardians selected for political influence rather than maternal warmth. A queen's child might spend years away from her, raised in distant castles, their relationships carefully managed and limited by royal etiquette. Imagine the ache in a mother's heart as her child was carried away. How the empty nursery echoed softly with loss, yet no tears were allowed in public, no grief openly acknowledged. She had to trust strangers with her child's care, knowing well that politics, not love, governed those decisions. Consider Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose son, Richard the Lionheart, grew distant from her despite her fierce love and political influence. Eleanor was strong, strategic and capable, yet motherhood strained even her legendary strength. Her sons, trained for politics and war, eventually rebelled against their father, King Henry II, embroiling Eleanor in scandal and imprisonment. Eleanor's maternal love was viewed not as devotion but as dangerous political meddling. Her power, her influence over her sons, was a threat. Eventually she was locked away by her husband, separated from the children she'd birthed and nurtured. Even powerful queens discovered that motherhood could be weaponized against them, their own offspring used as pawns by husbands, nobles or enemies. And motherhood could also expose queens to devastating slander. Accusations of illegitimacy, whispered insinuations about a child's parentage, could ruin a queen's reputation in an instant. Marguerite of Anjou, queen to Henry VI, endured constant rumours claiming her son Edward was not fathered by the king. Henry's fragile mental health provided ample fodder for nobles looking to discredit Marguerite, undermining her authority and legitimacy as queen. Her motherhood, rather than celebrated, became a source of endless scandal, doubt and humiliation. This ruthless scrutiny forced queens to develop cunning strategies. They learned to navigate court intrigue, guarding their children's reputations fiercely, securing loyal allies, and mastering quiet diplomacy behind closed doors. Queens who survived learned quickly that motherhood required not just physical strength, but political savvy. They protected their offspring fiercely, understanding that their children's lives and their own depended upon clever manipulation of court politics, whispered conversations, secret alliances, and carefully concealed truths. Yet, despite these burdens, many medieval queens loved their children profoundly, risking everything to protect them from harm. Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, provides a powerful example. Widowed young and politically vulnerable, Margaret dedicated her life to her son's protection, enduring exile, separation, and constant danger. Her careful plotting eventually secured Henry's throne, founding the Tudor dynasty. Margaret's maternal devotion reshaped English history, proving how fiercely a mother's love could burn even in the harshest political climates. Tonight, as you walk softly through the halls of these ancient palaces, pause a moment in the empty nurseries. Feel the quiet heartbreak echoing gently through empty cradles and faded portraits. See past crowns and jewels, silks and smiles, and glimpse the quiet strength of mothers who navigated political intrigue, who mourned in silence, who loved fiercely despite relentless pressure. Their legacies stretch quietly into the present, silent reminders of the power, vulnerability, and profound humanity hidden beneath royal mantles. So tonight, remember them not just as queens, but as mothers, complex, loving, resilient. Imagine their whispered lullabies in empty chambers, their hands reaching gently for children they could barely hold, their hearts quietly breaking beneath composed facades. Carry their stories gently within your heart, recognizing the quiet courage it took to survive and love in a world where motherhood was both a privilege and a punishment. And as the candles flicker softly around you, as the velvet curtains stir gently in the breeze, feel the quiet strength of these mothers beside you, whispering gently, soothingly, "I loved fiercely, quietly, bravely, and though the world judged harshly, I gave all I had." Tonight you carry these whispers forward, gentle echoes reminding you that motherhood, even within palaces, has always been quietly heroic, fiercely loving, profoundly human. You step carefully across polished marble floors, past flickering torches whose faint orange glow trembles against stone walls. In the quiet corners of these castles, beneath vaulted ceilings painted with stars and saints, darker secrets were whispered, sins graver than hidden lovers or coded embroidery. Here, accusations of murder, poison, and shadowy plots filled hushed conversations, wrapping queens in webs of scandal that few could escape. Queens, after all, wielded power quietly, through influence rather than outright force. Their tools were subtle, whispered promises, hidden letters, the soft rustle of skirts in dimly lit corridors. Yet some queens were accused of more sinister methods: poisoned cups, lethal rings, silken pillows smothering breaths in moonlit chambers. Rumours of murder and conspiracy, once attached, were impossible to erase, staining royal reputations permanently. Take the shadowy tale of Joanna of Naples, a queen whose reign was marred by whispered accusations and dark suspicions. Joanna ascended to her throne as a teenager, thrust prematurely into the harsh spotlight of medieval politics. Her husband, Andrew, was widely unpopular, a foreign prince whose crude manner and brash entitlement earned him bitter resentment among the Neapolitan court. Then, on a quiet September night, Andrew was found hanging lifelessly from a balcony, a silk cord twisted cruelly around his neck. His murder was brutal, sudden, shocking, and suspicion immediately fell upon Joanna. But Joanna was hardly alone. Medieval courts were rife with accusations of poison and murder plots, particularly levelled against queens whose influence threatened powerful men. Poison was considered the perfect weapon, silent, discreet, easily hidden in rings, goblets, or perfumes. It left no visible scars, no violent scenes, just a quiet death, easily disguised as illness or accident. This made poison not only deadly, but insidiously useful in medieval power struggles. And for queens already navigating dangerous waters, accusations of poison, true or not, could swiftly destroy their reputations and lives. Consider Lucrezia Borgia. Though slightly later in history, she remains one of the most infamous names tied to poisoned legacies. Daughter of Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia grew up surrounded by whispers, intrigue, and political schemes. Married multiple times for political alliances, she became a pawn for her powerful family's ruthless ambitions. Rumours dogged Lucrezia throughout her life. Claims that she carried vials of poison hidden within elaborate jewellery, ready to dispense death at a moment's notice. Her gentle demeanour and renowned beauty made such accusations even more scandalous, transforming her image from an innocent pawn into a cunning murderess. Similarly, Isabella of France, the so-called she-wolf, queen to Edward II, was another woman whose reputation became permanently tied to accusations of murder. Edward's favouritism toward male companions, notably Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, humiliated Isabella publicly. When she led an invasion against her husband, accusations swiftly followed. Isabella allegedly orchestrated Edward's murder, most famously described as gruesome, though likely exaggerated, involving a hot iron. Historians still debate Isabella's direct involvement, many believing she ordered Edward's imprisonment rather than murder. But her legacy as a murderous queen endures, a potent reminder of how accusations of violence were wielded as weapons to discredit queens who dared challenge their roles. Queens, even innocent ones, lived with the ever-present threat of suspicion. Any unexplained death or illness could ignite whispers of poison, fueling paranoia and fear throughout courtly circles. These rumours often had political motivations. Powerful nobles, rivals, even kings themselves could exploit such accusations to remove inconvenient queens. Many queens lived in constant fear of food or drink being tampered with, employing trusted tasters and complex rituals to safeguard themselves from harm. Take Mary of Hungary, queen consort of Naples in the late 14th century. Her brief marriage to Charles III of Naples ended abruptly with his mysterious assassination. Immediately, rumours swirled around Mary. Did she orchestrate her husband's death to gain power? Historians today generally agree Mary was likely innocent, yet contemporary gossip condemned her swiftly, painting her as a schemer and poisoner. The power of whispers was enough to force Mary into exile, her reputation irreparably harmed despite lack of evidence. Yet, even amid so much darkness, queens sometimes turned accusations of poisoning into weapons themselves, either subtly to intimidate rivals or boldly to assert their strength. Caterina Sforza, the remarkable Italian countess known for her fierce resilience, openly threatened enemies with poison, using the very rumours that haunted other women as tools to bolster her image as a formidable leader. Whether or not Caterina genuinely poisoned anyone, her willingness to embrace these dark rumours created a mystique that protected her. Fear became her shield, poison her quiet sword. Ultimately, the presence of poison and murder rumours highlights the profound vulnerability of medieval queens. Any queen who challenged convention, wielded influence, or simply displeased powerful factions risked having her reputation destroyed by accusations impossible to disprove. The mere suggestion of poison carried enough weight to exile, imprison, or execute a queen, even one entirely innocent. Tonight, as you walk these corridors lined with shadowy portraits and flickering candles, imagine the quiet fear queens carried daily, knowing one accusation, whispered at the wrong time, could end their reigns. Picture Joanna's defiant face as she faced her accusers, Lucrezia's quiet sorrow beneath accusations she could never escape, Eleanor's proud dignity crumbling beneath the weight of scandal. Hear Isabella's whispered denial of a murder she may not have planned. Their truths remain unknowable, lost beneath centuries of rumour and political intrigue. Yet their legacies survive, etched forever in whispers of poison, murder, and dark conspiracies. Their stories caution us about the dangerous power of gossip, reminding us how easily reputations can be poisoned, lives ruined by suspicion alone. Tonight, carry these whispers gently, remembering the quiet resilience of queens who endured rumours, suspicion, and scandal with dignity. Understand their strength beneath accusation, their quiet courage amid cruelty. And as you drift towards sleep, let their stories remind you to judge gently, knowing whispers seldom tell the whole truth. For behind each poisoned rumour stands a woman, complex, misunderstood, fiercely human, who once navigated corridors of shadow and survived whispers sharper than any dagger. Tonight, you walk with them, hearing softly whispered truths beneath centuries of scandal, reminding you that even poison rumours can never truly silence the quiet strength of queens who endured. Your footsteps whisper softly across a hall lined with mirrors and rich tapestries, their delicate threads shimmering gently in candlelight. Here, beneath ceilings painted with cherubs and saints, queens once prepared themselves for the relentless scrutiny of the court. But in medieval times, beauty wasn't merely decoration. It was armour, a subtle weapon of politics, power and survival. Every detail, from a queen's gown to her jewellery, became carefully crafted symbols used to communicate, deceive, or protect. In the opulent dressing rooms of queens, silk rustled softly beneath careful fingers, gold embroidery glittered under flickering candlelight, and delicate perfumes mixed gently with the scent of burning incense. A queen's wardrobe was more than mere clothing. It was a carefully coded language, filled with hidden messages and silent statements. Every stitch, every colour, every jewel worn by a queen held significance, chosen deliberately to convey power, allegiance, or defiance. Queens and their ladies-in-waiting spent hours in careful preparations, choosing gowns made from velvets woven in Burgundy, silks from Byzantium, and lace crafted by Flemish artisans. These luxurious fabrics weren't simply fashion statements. They represented alliances, displayed wealth, and conveyed political loyalty subtly but unmistakably. A gown of English wool might signal support for local industry, while exotic silks indicated powerful international alliances. Nothing worn by queens was accidental. Every garment spoke quietly yet forcefully, carrying subtle messages through halls filled with watchful eyes. And jewellery, delicate, intricate, quietly powerful, became another means of silent communication. Queens wore rings engraved with secret mottos, lockets hiding small portraits of distant loved ones, or jewels containing carefully concealed messages known only to a trusted few. Such personal adornments became lifelines in palaces filled with intrigue, allowing queens to maintain connections across courts, borders, and loyalties. Yet the jewellery itself could be double-edged. Rings filled with poison, bracelets concealing miniature daggers, necklaces laced subtly with dangerous powders. Such sinister accessories existed in rumour, imagination, and sometimes reality. Queens carefully chose their adornments not just for beauty but for protection. A single ring might signal devotion, defiance, or danger, depending upon the hand that wore it and the eyes observing. Similarly, Margaret of Anjou, queen consort to Henry VI, wielded her wardrobe like a quiet sword. Margaret frequently wore gowns richly decorated with symbols associated with her French ancestry, boldly asserting her foreign heritage amid an English court suspicious of outsiders. Margaret's deliberate fashion choices emphasised her authority and pride, signalling subtly that she refused to be intimidated or diminished by whispers questioning her loyalty. Her clothing silently proclaimed strength, dignity, and defiance, a gentle yet powerful form of resistance. Yet fashion also carried darker implications. Queens risked accusations of vanity or extravagance, easily twisted into weapons by enemies. Isabella of France, queen to Edward II, faced harsh criticism for her lavish wardrobe, accused by nobles of draining royal coffers through her expensive tastes. Isabella's gowns became symbols of her alleged vanity and corruption, transforming her reputation from a dignified queen into a greedy, self-indulgent villainess. Yet historians now recognise Isabella's clothing likely reflected royal expectations rather than personal vanity, her reputation deliberately damaged by rivals seeking her downfall. But fashion wasn't limited to gowns and jewellery. Hairstyles, cosmetics, even perfumes were carefully orchestrated to communicate silently. Queens wore elaborate hairstyles decorated with jewels or pearls, the height and complexity symbolising their social status and authority. Perfumes, carefully selected and imported from distant lands, added another subtle dimension. Fragrances communicated wealth, refinement, and international connections, luxuries accessible only to the highest nobles. Medieval beauty standards themselves became a battleground for queens. Ideal beauty was defined by pale skin, high foreheads, delicate features, standards that queens often struggled painfully to meet. Cosmetics were created from dangerous substances like mercury and lead, slowly poisoning women who wore them regularly. These toxic beauty treatments underscore the quiet desperation queens faced. Beauty was mandatory yet perilous, necessary yet quietly destructive. But beauty carried risks beyond poison cosmetics. A queen too beautiful could attract dangerous envy. Not beautiful enough risked derision and political vulnerability. Eleanor of Castile, queen consort to Edward I, navigated this difficult balance carefully. Known for her striking looks, Eleanor's beauty inspired admiration, but also jealousy and slander. Enemies whispered accusations of witchcraft, claiming Eleanor's attractiveness was unnatural, the result of dark magic. Eleanor defended herself quietly, maintaining dignity despite vicious attacks aimed squarely at her appearance. Queens learned quickly that beauty required careful management. Too much attention drawn to one's appearance risked accusations of vanity or manipulation, while neglecting beauty standards invited criticism for lack of refinement. This constant balancing act required queens to carefully control their public image, beautiful enough to maintain royal dignity without provoking scandal or envy. But some queens deliberately challenged beauty standards, wielding unconventional appearances as quiet statements of defiance. Eleanor of Aquitaine famously wore bold fashions from her homeland, shocking conservative English nobles accustomed to subdued court attire. Eleanor's confident embrace of flamboyant styles expressed her independence and strength, her clothing quietly proclaiming she refused to conform to restrictive expectations. Similarly, Anne Boleyn, later queen to Henry VIII, deliberately cultivated a provocative beauty, wearing striking fashions and bold jewellery, openly challenging traditional ideas of queenly modesty. Anne's deliberate choices sparked scandal, criticism and admiration simultaneously. Her appearance weaponized strategically to assert power and presence in a court fiercely resistant to her influence. Tonight, as you wander gently through these halls of quiet luxury, pause beside the ornate mirrors where queens once prepared themselves. Look deeply into your own reflection. See past superficial beauty into quiet strength, resilience and complexity beneath. Understand that medieval queens navigated impossible expectations of appearance, wielding fashion as armour, beauty as silent rebellion. Imagine Elizabeth's careful stitching of symbolism into gowns, Margaret's quiet defiance in embroidered pride, Isabella's misunderstood elegance, Eleanor's confident boldness, Anne's deliberate provocation. Recognise the quiet courage required to navigate beauty as political battleground, a dangerous dance between vanity, survival, rebellion and conformity. Feel their whispers gently around you tonight. I wore silks and jewels not merely for beauty but for survival. Beneath embroidery and perfume, I quietly asserted strength and dignity in a world determined to silence me. Tonight, carry these quiet truths within you. Recognize beauty as complex, layered, quietly powerful. Armor, rebellion, dignity, all woven subtly beneath gentle fabrics and delicate perfumes. And as you drift towards sleep, allow their whispers to remind you that beauty, beneath royal expectations, has always been fiercely human, quietly courageous, deeply resilient. Tonight your heart carries their truths, gently whispered reminders of quiet bravery hidden softly beneath silks, jewels, and delicate perfumes. You pause quietly at the threshold of a grand hall, immense and echoing, its vaulted ceilings hidden beneath shadows, supported by tall columns carved with intricate, winding vines. Even empty, the room pulses with memory, whispers of feasts and councils that once shaped entire kingdoms. But here, beneath shimmering chandeliers and silk banners embroidered with family crests, queens navigated their most complex battlefield, the relentless pursuit of power. For medieval queens, power wasn't a straightforward gift. It was something grasped through quiet cunning, fierce intelligence, and constant vigilance. It wasn't simply handed to queens, it was earned, fought for, quietly seized in moments when no one watched closely enough. And even once obtained, power could slip away as silently as shadows at dawn. Imagine for a moment you are Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most formidable queens in history. Eleanor's reign was extraordinary, stretching across 2 kingdoms and 2 powerful marriages, first as Queen of France, then as Queen of England. At every stage of her life, Eleanor wielded power masterfully, deftly navigating court intrigue with remarkable strength. Yet even Eleanor, a woman renowned for her unyielding determination, had to continually protect herself against rivals who sought to undermine her every move. Eleanor's power came not merely from her crowns or titles, but from her own charisma, intellect, and daring. She boldly joined her first husband, King Louis VII, on the Second Crusade, an audacious decision that scandalized the conservative French court. Eleanor dressed in armor, commanding troops alongside Louis, openly asserting authority far beyond the limited domestic role traditionally reserved for queens. After divorcing Louis, Eleanor married Henry II of England, another powerful monarch whose personality matched her own formidable will. Their union was passionate, stormy, often tense. 2 strong minds clashing, collaborating, occasionally betraying each other. Eleanor managed vast territories, established a glittering court known for its sophistication, and gave birth to children who would profoundly reshape English history. Yet her greatest challenge lay within her own family. As her sons grew, their ambitions clashed violently with Henry's, sparking rebellions that tore the kingdom apart. Eleanor boldly sided with her sons against Henry, openly defying her husband's authority. It was an extraordinary act, dangerous, politically daring, fiercely maternal. Eleanor understood clearly the risks she faced, knowing Henry's wrath could mean imprisonment or worse, yet her determination never wavered. Eleanor wielded power not merely from ambition, but from fierce loyalty to her children and profound belief in their right to rule. She paid dearly for her defiance, enduring imprisonment for 16 years, yet remained unbroken. Her legacy as a queen who seized power fearlessly, despite consequences, still echoes powerfully through history. Yet Eleanor's story is just one of many. Queens throughout medieval Europe confronted the paradoxical demand to be powerful yet submissive, visible yet quiet. Consider Isabella of Castile, known as Isabella the Catholic, whose reign alongside her husband Ferdinand transformed Spain into a global empire. Isabella wasn't content simply to support Ferdinand quietly. She actively participated in governance, military campaigns, and complex diplomatic maneuvers. Isabella commissioned voyages of exploration, notably supporting Christopher Columbus's famous expedition, boldly expanding Spain's influence far beyond its traditional boundaries. Margaret of Denmark, Queen Consort of James III of Scotland, faced a different yet equally challenging path to power. Margaret entered a court rife with conflict, betrayal, and suspicion. James was an indecisive, often weak king, leaving Margaret to quietly assert influence, guiding decisions behind the scenes. Margaret's subtle manipulation of court politics, negotiating alliances, carefully positioning loyal allies, gently nudging James's decisions, allowed her to wield significant influence without attracting dangerous attention. Margaret understood power was safest when wielded quietly, concealed beneath layers of polite smiles and gentle persuasion. Yet even quiet influence carried risks. Margaret faced constant accusations from nobles resentful of her subtle, yet potent authority. Her careful diplomacy was twisted into accusations of manipulation and treachery, forcing Margaret to navigate court politics delicately. She learned quickly that even quiet power attracted envy and suspicion, requiring vigilance to protect herself and maintain influence. Margaret of Anjou, Queen Consort to Henry VI of England, provides another compelling example. Margaret arrived in England as a young bride, quickly confronted by the stark reality of her husband's mental instability and political vulnerability. Henry's frequent incapacitation left Margaret to navigate England's turbulent political landscape alone, fiercely protecting her husband's throne and their son's inheritance. Even quieter queens who wielded power subtly could still suffer harsh judgment. Philippa of Hainaut, Queen Consort to Edward III of England, was widely admired for her gentle nature, charitable work, and supportive presence beside Edward. Philippa rarely attracted scandal, quietly influencing court decisions through compassion rather than force. Yet even Philippa's quiet power drew whispers of suspicion, critics suggesting her influence over Edward weakened his authority. Queens, whether assertive or gentle, faced relentless scrutiny simply for holding any degree of influence. Quiet influence could also manifest in patronage. Queens frequently wielded power by carefully supporting artists, scholars, and religious institutions. Blanche of Castile, mother of Louis IX of France, exemplified this quieter form of power. Blanche guided Louis skillfully through his youth, carefully educating him to become an effective king. Her patronage supported education, religious reforms, and artistic achievements, quietly reshaping French society through cultural rather than political channels. Yet even Blanche's quiet authority attracted resentment. Nobles accused her of excessive influence over Louis, whispering criticisms of her power behind closed doors. Blanche navigated these criticisms skillfully. Understanding power required careful management, discretion, and constant vigilance to maintain effectively. Tonight, carry their quiet truths forward, gently within your heart, understanding that power, boldly seized, subtly maintained, fiercely protected, has always required profound courage beneath royal dignity. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let their quiet whispers remind you that strength takes many forms, that courage need not always roar loudly to be heard clearly. Tonight, your heart holds their quiet stories, gentle, powerful reminders that power, beneath crowns and titles, remains profoundly human, fiercely brave, quietly resilient. Your footsteps soften as you step into a vast chamber, lit faintly by clusters of flickering candles placed along marble alcoves. The air here carries a heaviness. Perhaps it's the lingering echoes of whispered confessions, quiet murmurs of guilt and innocence exchanged beneath ceilings painted with holy images. This chamber, ornate yet oppressive, symbolizes one of the darkest rituals faced by medieval queens, the relentless pressure to confess or face condemnation. In medieval Europe, queens navigated not only the treacherous waters of political power, but also the equally perilous currents of spiritual scrutiny. For queens, the confessional became a subtle yet formidable battleground, where the gentle whisper of a priest carried more weight than armies, where rumours quietly spoken behind altar screens could topple kingdoms. Picture yourself kneeling in a dimly lit chapel, candle flames trembling softly around you. Before you stands the confessional, an ornate yet foreboding wooden structure, carved intricately with scenes of saints and sinners, a silent reminder that spiritual purity was never truly private. You kneel, feeling the cool wood pressing through the fabric of your gown, heart quickening at the sound of footsteps approaching. Your confessor enters quietly, his face barely visible behind the lattice screen, his voice low and soothing as he invites you to speak your sins. Yet beneath this gentle ritual lay immense danger. Medieval queens knew confession wasn't merely spiritual cleansing, it was a ritual of vulnerability, a moment when their innermost thoughts could become weapons wielded by rivals. queens navigated confession carefully, selecting their words with precision, revealing only enough to appear sincere yet hiding fiercely guarded truths beneath layers of silence and subtlety. Confession posed unique dangers for queens. Their words were recorded, whispered quietly from priest to bishop, bishop to cardinal, eventually reaching ears eager for scandal. Priests, though bound theoretically by sacred vows, often faced enormous pressure to reveal a queen's secrets. Confessional sanctity might crumble beneath political necessity, leaving queens exposed, vulnerable to accusations, blackmail, or worse. Consider Eleanor of Aquitaine once again, a queen whose life seemed endlessly entangled in scandal. During her tumultuous marriages, Eleanor's confessors became silent witnesses to her deepest fears, frustrations, and secrets. Her fierce independence and occasional defiance were viewed with suspicion, whispered confessions twisted quietly into dangerous insinuations of immorality, treason, even witchcraft. Eleanor carefully navigated confessionals, speaking cautiously, understanding that even the gentlest admission could ignite scandal, imprisonment, or exile. Similarly, Isabella of France, queen consort to Edward II of England, endured relentless spiritual scrutiny. Isabella's unhappy marriage drove her to confess deeply personal sorrows, including frustration with Edward's open favouritism toward his male companions. Her confessors, priests loyal either to Isabella or her rivals, became dangerous allies or foes, their whispered accounts shaping public perception. The Church held profound power over queens, spiritually, politically, personally. Queens who defied spiritual authority risked accusations of heresy, witchcraft, or blasphemy, charges powerful enough to destroy even the strongest queens. Heresy accusations became particularly dangerous as they justified severe punishment, imprisonment, exile, even execution. Queens lived constantly aware that spiritual purity required careful management, their reputations vulnerable to even subtle accusations whispered quietly by priests or courtiers. Marguerite Porete, though not a queen herself, offers a chilling example of the extreme dangers women faced when accused of spiritual wrongdoing. Marguerite, a medieval mystic who authored a book challenging traditional church teachings, faced accusations of heresy. Despite eloquently defending her spiritual beliefs, Marguerite was condemned by powerful ecclesiastical authorities. She was burned publicly, her writings destroyed. Her execution reminded queens across Europe of the deadly consequences of defying church authority, reinforcing the terrifying power spiritual accusations carried. Queens learned quickly that confessional sanctity could crumble under political pressures. Anne Boleyn, queen consort to Henry VIII, provides a powerful example. Anne's brief, tumultuous reign was marred by relentless accusations, infidelity, incest, witchcraft, all derived from confessional whispers twisted cruelly by political rivals. Historians still debate whether Anne's confessors actively betrayed her, or if rumours arose independently. Yet Anne's tragic fate demonstrated powerfully the devastating consequences confession carried. Her private vulnerabilities weaponized ruthlessly, leading swiftly to her execution. Queens developed strategies to navigate these spiritual dangers. Some chose confessors carefully, selecting priests loyal personally rather than politically, hoping friendship might protect their secrets. Others employed silence strategically, revealing only superficial sins, petty jealousies, minor frustrations, carefully hiding deeper vulnerabilities beneath composed facades. Yet even these strategies carried risks. Priests detecting evasion might suspect deeper secrets, probing further, threatening subtle accusations to coerce deeper confessions. The dangerous relationship between queens and confessors was further complicated by gender dynamics. Priests, exclusively male, wielded immense authority over female penitents, their words determining queens' spiritual fates. Queens endured subtle pressure from confessors, gently encouraged or quietly threatened to confess specific sins, aligning conveniently with political agendas. Gender dynamics subtly amplified queens' vulnerability, their spiritual authority dependent entirely upon male clerical approval. Queens who openly challenged spiritual authority faced immense consequences. Joan I of Naples provides a powerful example. Accused of immorality, witchcraft, and even murdering her husband, Andrew, Joan's spiritual reputation suffered greatly. Her refusal to yield quietly to accusations prompted fierce condemnation from the Church, leading eventually to her violent murder by rivals claiming divine justification. Joan's tragic fate reminded queens across Europe of the mortal dangers defying spiritual authority posed, reinforcing subtle yet profound pressures queens endured. Yet some queens navigated spiritual scrutiny masterfully, wielding spiritual authority quietly yet confidently. Blanche of Castile, Queen Regent of France, used religious devotion strategically, establishing monasteries, supporting education, actively participating in religious ceremonies. Blanche's spiritual dedication protected her reputation subtly, yet powerfully, providing defense against potential accusations, reinforcing her legitimacy and authority as regent. Queens frequently sponsored religious institutions, establishing monasteries, convents, universities, acts demonstrating piety and generosity, subtly reinforcing spiritual authority. Patronage provided powerful protection against accusations of immorality or heresy, allowing queens to cultivate carefully managed reputations as spiritually pure, deeply devoted, quietly virtuous. Patronage became a subtle yet potent shield against spiritual threats, allowing queens to navigate spiritual scrutiny skillfully, confidently, quietly, powerful. Yet even patronage carried risks. Excessive generosity could prompt accusations of extravagance, vanity, or political manipulation disguised as spirituality. Queens balanced patronage carefully, displaying devotion subtly yet powerfully, avoiding overtly ambitious gestures likely prompting suspicion or envy. Tonight, as you kneel quietly within this imagined chapel, feel gently the immense spiritual pressures queens navigated daily. Understand confession wasn't merely spiritual cleansing, but vulnerability carefully managed, a quiet yet profound battleground where whispered secrets became powerful weapons. Recognize spiritual scrutiny queens endured, navigating relentless pressures subtly yet fiercely, wielding devotion strategically, resisting subtly spiritual threats seeking their downfall. Imagine Eleanor's cautious confessions, Isabella's whispered fears weaponized subtly against her, Anne's tragic fate demonstrating confessional vulnerability. Hear their quiet whispers tonight, gently urging you. Remember us not merely as queens, but women navigating relentless pressures beneath crowns, within chapels, among whispers. Recognize our quiet courage beneath relentless scrutiny, subtle strength within silent vulnerability. Tonight, carry their whispered truths forward, understanding spiritual scrutiny queens endured profoundly yet quietly. Recognize spiritual vulnerability not merely weakness, but quiet strength, resilience, bravery beneath subtle yet relentless pressures. As you drift gently towards sleep, let their quiet whispers remind you of subtle strength within vulnerability, profound resilience beneath gentle confession. Understand spiritual pressures queens endured, quietly yet fiercely, subtly yet profoundly, reminding gently that strength emerges quietly beneath relentless scrutiny, within whispered confessionals, among gentle candle flames flickering softly in quiet chapels. Tonight your heart carries their whispered stories, gentle yet powerful reminders spiritual strength emerges quietly yet profoundly beneath subtle vulnerability. You step softly across polished stone floors, your path illuminated only by the faint glow of lanterns hung sparingly along corridor walls. Ahead, shadows gather gently, clinging lovingly to carved archways and ornate pillars, lending mystery to an otherwise serene and silent space. The halls you wander tonight seem peaceful, sacred, yet beneath these holy facades, medieval queens navigated perhaps their most profound contradiction of all, expected publicly to be saints, privately accused of being sirens. Queens, by their very position, embodied conflicting ideals. Publicly revered as symbols of purity and virtue, their images often adorned cathedral windows, their likenesses gracing altarpieces, paintings, and illuminated manuscripts. Queens, cloaked in velvet robes embroidered in gold, were celebrated as icons of sanctity, their quiet dignity elevated into something divine. Yet behind closed doors, this same virtue was relentlessly questioned, their humanity scrutinized for signs of weakness or sin. Picture yourself kneeling quietly in an immense cathedral, the air heavy with incense, gently illuminated by coloured sunlight filtering softly through stained glass windows depicting saintly queens. Around you, gentle murmurs of prayer echo softly, blending beautifully with distant chants, creating a serene, sacred atmosphere. Yet even here, beneath gentle chants and whispered prayers, queens faced relentless scrutiny, expected publicly to embody sainthood while privately accused of hidden sins, subtle corruption, dangerous allure. Consider St. Margaret of Scotland, renowned during her lifetime for profound piety and charity. Margaret dedicated herself fully to religious devotion, establishing monasteries, caring deeply for the poor, exemplifying saintly compassion. Yet even Margaret faced whispers questioning her virtue. Subtle rumours quietly suggesting pride or ambition lurked beneath her saintly facade. Margaret's genuine piety wasn't enough to shield her entirely. Queens inevitably endured subtle suspicions, whispers seeking quietly to uncover hidden flaws. Queens learned quickly that sainthood was safest when carefully managed. Public devotion balanced delicately against private humanity. Excessive piety invited accusations of hypocrisy or pride. Insufficient devotion drew whispers of immorality or impiety. Queens balanced spiritual lives delicately, publicly exemplifying virtue, while privately acknowledging quiet vulnerabilities hidden beneath composed facades. Joan of Navarre, Queen Consort to Henry IV of England, provides another poignant example. Joan displayed exemplary devotion, actively supporting religious institutions, generously funding charitable causes, publicly revered for her spiritual dedication. Yet Joan eventually faced dangerous accusations, imprisoned briefly by her stepson Henry V on charges of witchcraft. Yet personal devotion itself could invite dangerous scrutiny, excessive reliance upon confessors, prompting accusations of improper relationships, manipulation, or vulnerability. Queens balanced personal devotion carefully, maintaining sufficient independence to avoid suspicion, yet quietly cultivating spiritual relationships subtly protective and supportive. Queens often engaged carefully with religious symbolism, wearing crosses, crucifixes, religious jewellery demonstrating devotion subtly yet powerfully. Religious symbols subtly reinforce spiritual authority, providing quiet defence against accusations, silently asserting virtue beneath carefully managed public images. Isabella of Castile skillfully utilised religious symbolism, frequently portrayed holding rosaries, crosses, prominently displaying spiritual devotion publicly, yet quietly reinforcing her authority privately. Isabella's religious symbolism provided powerful protection against accusations, subtly reinforcing legitimacy and authority beneath carefully managed spiritual imagery. Yet religious symbolism itself risked subtle suspicion, excessive displays potentially viewed as manipulation or vanity. Queens balanced religious symbolism delicately, demonstrating sufficient devotion without prompting accusations of hypocrisy or manipulation. Queens navigated spiritual contradictions masterfully, skillfully balancing public devotion against private humanity, demonstrating virtue subtly yet powerfully, protecting reputations quietly yet profoundly. Tonight, wandering gently within this cathedral, feel their quiet strength around you, subtle resilience beneath relentless scrutiny, gentle courage within spiritual vulnerability. Imagine Margaret's genuine piety questioned quietly, Joan's dangerous accusations despite exemplary devotion, Eleanor's carefully managed patronage protecting subtly, Anne's genuine spirituality subtly reinforcing legitimacy, Isabella's religious symbolism quietly asserting authority. Hear their quiet whispers tonight gently urging you. Remember us not merely as queens, but women navigating profound contradictions beneath crowns, within cathedrals, among whispers. Recognize our quiet strength beneath relentless scrutiny, gentle courage within spiritual vulnerability. Tonight, carry their whispered truths gently forward, recognizing quiet strength emerges profoundly beneath spiritual scrutiny, subtle resilience beneath relentless contradictions. Understand spirituality queens endured profoundly yet quietly. Recognize spiritual vulnerability, not merely weakness but quiet strength, gentle courage, profound resilience beneath subtle contradictions. As you drift gently towards sleep, let their quiet whispers remind you gently of subtle strength within vulnerability, profound courage beneath spiritual contradictions. Understand spiritual pressures, queens endured quietly yet fiercely, subtly yet profoundly, reminding gently, strength emerges quietly beneath relentless scrutiny, within whispered confessions, among gentle candle flames flickering softly in quiet cathedrals. Tonight your heart carries their whispered stories, gentle yet powerful reminders. Spiritual strength emerges quietly yet profoundly beneath subtle vulnerability, quiet courage beneath relentless contradictions. Tonight, carry their whispered truths forward, gentle reminders of subtle resilience, profound courage beneath relentless scrutiny, quiet strength beneath spiritual contradictions, recognizing spirituality not merely weakness but quiet strength, profoundly resilient beneath relentless scrutiny, subtle yet profoundly courageous beneath spiritual contradictions. You slip quietly through a winding stone passageway, your fingertips gently brushing the cool walls, feeling the whispers of ancient secrets captured forever within the castle's heart. This hidden corridor, concealed behind a tapestry depicting a hunting scene, leads to rooms few have ever seen, quiet spaces where queens once risked everything for love. Tonight, you'll explore these hidden chambers, these carefully guarded sanctuaries where queens secretly embraced the lovers they weren't supposed to have. Love, for medieval queens, rarely followed the rules. Their marriages were carefully negotiated political contracts, alliances sealed by treaties rather than affection. Queens, expected publicly to embody virtue and fidelity, often found themselves married to strangers, forced into intimate alliances devoid of genuine affection. Yet human hearts defy easily imposed boundaries. Love quietly sought its own path, slipping gently through cracks in rigid expectations, blooming softly yet defiantly within shadows. Imagine yourself stepping into a quiet chamber, its silence wrapped lovingly around you, illuminated gently by a solitary candle, flickering softly upon a table. Here, beneath ceilings carved intricately with vines and flowers, queens once risked everything for stolen moments. Brief, precious embraces beneath moonlit windows, whispered promises exchanged hurriedly, fleeting yet profoundly meaningful. Few queens embodied the tragic complexity of secret love as vividly as Guinevere, legendary queen of King Arthur. Although her existence lies wrapped gently within myth, Guinevere symbolizes the quiet tragedy of queens trapped within loveless marriages, yet longing secretly for genuine affection. Guinevere's illicit love for Lancelot, Arthur's trusted knight, brought ruin upon Camelot, yet historians still debate whether Guinevere's story symbolizes broader medieval anxieties regarding queens' infidelity or represents profound sympathy toward women trapped within marriages devoid of genuine affection. Catherine de' Medici, queen consort and later regent of France, provides a powerful example. Catherine endured profound emotional loneliness within marriage to Henry II, who openly favoured his mistress Diane de Poitiers. Catherine carefully navigated immense emotional pain, cultivating quiet relationships discreetly supportive, carefully selected confidants, gently offering emotional solace safely yet discreetly. Historians fiercely debate whether Catherine genuinely engaged illicit relationships herself, yet Catherine's emotional vulnerabilities vividly illustrate profound emotional loneliness queens quietly endured within loveless marriages. Anne Boleyn vividly illustrates profound dangers queens faced navigating illicit relationships. Anne faced relentless accusations regarding alleged affairs. Historians fiercely debate accusations' validity, some viewing Anne sympathetically as victim political attacks, others condemning harshly for recklessness. Yet Anne's tragic fate vividly underscores dangers queens confronted quietly, navigating illicit relationships discreetly yet profoundly. Tonight, quietly wandering gently within concealed chambers, feel profoundly emotional vulnerabilities queens faced, quietly longing genuine affection beneath relentless pressures, conformity, safety, legitimacy. Imagine Eleanor's alleged relationships subtly reflecting profound loneliness, Isabella's quiet desperation driving dangerous rebellion, Catherine Howard's tragic fate vividly illustrating danger's illicit affection, Mary's profound vulnerabilities quietly hidden beneath composed facades. Queen's whispered stories tonight remind gently emotional vulnerabilities beneath composed facades, profound loneliness hidden carefully beneath royal dignity, quiet longing, genuine affection beneath relentless pressures, conformity, legitimacy, safety. Understand illicit relationships. Queens navigated quietly yet profoundly, recognizing emotional vulnerabilities beneath relentless pressures. Queens quietly endured profoundly yet discreetly. As you drift gently towards sleep tonight, allow their whispered truths gently remind emotional vulnerabilities profoundly human beneath royal dignity, recognizing illicit affection, quietly pursued profoundly yet discreetly, subtly yet courageously beneath relentless pressures, conformity, safety, legitimacy. Tonight, your heart carries whispered stories gently forward, profound reminders, emotional vulnerabilities queens quietly endured, profoundly yet discreetly beneath royal dignity, subtle strength, quietly pursuing genuine affection profoundly yet discreetly beneath relentless scrutiny. Tonight, carry whispered truths gently forward, recognizing emotional vulnerabilities, queens navigated quietly yet profoundly beneath relentless pressures, conformity, legitimacy, safety, royal dignity, understanding illicit affection quietly pursued profoundly yet discreetly beneath profound emotional loneliness, queens quietly endured profoundly yet courageously beneath relentless scrutiny. Tonight your heart holds whispered truths gently, recognizing emotional vulnerabilities profoundly human beneath royal dignity, subtle strength queens quietly pursued affection, profoundly yet discreetly beneath relentless pressures, conformity, legitimacy, safety, quiet reminders, emotional vulnerabilities profoundly human beneath royal dignity, subtle yet courageous beneath relentless scrutiny. You find yourself wandering beneath a sky that never seems to lighten, the thick stone walls of the castle pressing in on all sides, corridors alive with rumour. Here the air tastes sharper, as if every breath carries the bitter tang of secrets, some old, some fresh, many tinged with blood. Tonight you journey through the darkest legacies of medieval queens, crowns dripping in blood, the shadow of betrayal, and revenge that refuses to stay hidden. Queens, so often painted as serene figures in illuminated manuscripts, were as vulnerable as they were powerful. Their rise to greatness sometimes left trails that the world was never meant to see: buried bodies, destroyed families, wars that tore kingdoms asunder. In the world of royal intrigue, a queen's hands were never truly clean, no matter how finely they were washed. You can almost hear the echoes of steel-clad boots and weeping children as you step through history's gallery of blood-stained crowns. The torchlight flickers on ancient tapestries, depicting battle, coronation, execution, reminders that every royal ascension demanded sacrifice, and every victory left someone vanquished in the dark. Consider Matilda of Flanders, consort to William the Conqueror. Her marriage began with a fierce argument. Legend says Matilda threw William to the ground, before finally accepting him as husband. Yet once queen, Matilda's intelligence and ambition shone, her name invoked by those who both loved and feared her. She watched as her husband's conquest of England was paid for in blood, villages burned, noble families wiped out. In tapestry and song, Matilda's role was sometimes softened, but reality was harsher. She ruled Normandy while William campaigned, oversaw punitive measures against rebels, and enforced brutal justice in her husband's absence. But sometimes queens themselves were victims, pawns in violent games, left to pay the price for wars and betrayals beyond their control. Anne Neville, daughter of the infamous kingmaker Richard Neville, and later queen consort to Richard III, lived her short life surrounded by war. Her father switched allegiances, kings rose and fell, and Anne was used as a piece on the bloody chessboard of English civil strife. She lost family, freedom, even her own son. Each loss a quiet echo of the carnage left in the wake of men's ambitions. Her brief reign was marked by tragedy. Her death followed soon by her husband's defeat and death at Bosworth, the Wars of the Roses closing on a stage set with grief. Blood for queens was not always metaphorical. Dynastic succession meant childbirth could be a literal battle. Many queens died delivering heirs, their lives expended to feed dynastic ambition. Mary, Queen of Scots, gave birth in the shadow of Scottish turmoil. The birth of her son James would secure a new dynasty, yet Mary's later downfall would be equally bloody, ending with her beheading at Fotheringhay Castle. The velvet cushion beneath her head, so the legend goes, turned dark with blood. The final, silent punctuation of a life shaped by both love and betrayal. Queens sometimes played active roles in plots that left a trail of blood, some infamous, some nearly forgotten. Isabella of France, the she-wolf, orchestrated a rebellion against her husband Edward II with her lover Roger Mortimer. Their uprising ended with Edward's deposition and, allegedly, murder. The methods remain disputed, some say a blade, others a red-hot poker, yet blood was spilled for Isabella's freedom and her son's crown. Her hands too bore the stains of vengeance, and her reputation as both villain and victim still divides scholars. Then there is the terrible saga of Margaret of Anjou, whose life was defined by war and loss. She fought for her husband Henry VI's throne, personally leading armies during the Wars of the Roses. Margaret's courage was legendary, but her struggle left England soaked in blood. Sons slain, husbands captured, noble lines extinguished. The massacre at Tewkesbury saw Margaret's only son killed, her cause crushed, and Margaret herself captured and imprisoned. Her quest for power ended in personal ruin and national tragedy, her legacy shadowed by the carnage of civil war. Yet not all queens wielded swords. Sometimes blood was spilled through whispers, poisonings, or subtle manipulations. Lucrezia Borgia, while mostly outside the medieval period, has become emblematic of the deadly cunning queen, her reputation forever tied to rumours of murder and intrigue, her name invoked to this day as a warning that even a smile can cut as deeply as a blade. For every queen whose actions led to war or murder, there were those whose suffering became a warning, a story to frighten others into obedience. Anne Boleyn's downfall is one of history's most famous examples. Falsely accused of incest, adultery and treason, Anne was condemned in a mock trial and executed. Her blood, spilled on Tower Green, became a symbol both of royal ruthlessness and of the precariousness of a queen's fate. Some queens sought revenge in the face of betrayal. Eleanor of Aquitaine, when imprisoned by Henry II for supporting her son's rebellion, did not accept defeat quietly. Her eventual release and return to power was marked by calculated retribution, reordering the court, securing her lineage, and ensuring her enemies could never again threaten her children's inheritance. Eleanor's blood was never literally spilled in her long struggle, but the metaphorical battles she fought left deep wounds across generations. Blood feuds were not merely stories of war and murder, they echoed in every decision, every alliance, every marriage. The fate of queens was tied to the ability to produce heirs, and when the line of succession was threatened, rivals did not hesitate to shed blood to advance their own claims. The mysterious deaths of rival claimants, sudden illnesses, disappearances, all became part of the arsenal used to secure a crown, and queens were as likely to be accused of orchestrating such outcomes as they were to be victims of them. One of the most chilling reminders of the intersection of queenship and blood is the story of Joanna I of Naples. Accused of ordering her husband's murder, embroiled in endless civil wars, Joanna's reign ended with her own brutal execution. Her body, once crowned and robed in splendour, was thrown to the ground. Her blood, like so many before and after, spilled to satisfy the ambitions of others. The cycle of betrayal and revenge was not always so visible. Sometimes it took the form of a slow poison, a quiet disappearance, a child removed from succession. Queens who survived did so by mastering the art of subtlety, using alliances, marriages, or spiritual authority to exact vengeance or shield themselves from retribution. Catherine de' Medici's reign as Queen and Regent of France is filled with examples of blood and betrayal woven into the very fabric of royal policy. The infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, in which thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris, was blamed on Catherine's machinations. Whether she ordered the violence or was powerless to stop it remains debated, but her name became synonymous with ruthless statecraft, a queen whose crown was truly dripping in blood. Yet there were queens who refused to let the story end in carnage. Some managed to turn away from cycles of revenge, using their influence to seek peace or stability in times of chaos. Blanche of Castile, as regent for her son Louis IX, put down rebellions with firmness, but also worked tirelessly to maintain order and avoid needless bloodshed. Her deft handling of baronial unrest is sometimes overshadowed by more violent narratives, but in her hands, the crown became a symbol of reconciliation as much as of victory. Still, the burden of a blood-stained crown weighed heavily. Queens often spent their final years haunted by memories of violence, lost children, vanished lovers, friends executed for treason, kingdoms scarred by battle. The songs of minstrels and the prayers of monks could not wash away the pain or absolve the guilt that came from survival at the cost of others' suffering. Imagine now a queen alone in her chambers at night, lit only by the glow of dying embers. The corridors outside are silent, yet her memories are loud. Faces of the lost flickering in the dark, the accusations of betrayal whispering through the stones. The cost of power is never paid in gold, but in the currency of loss, regret, and, always, blood. Tonight, as you let the silence of these haunted halls settle around you, feel the full weight of history pressing gently upon your shoulders. Remember Matilda's ruthless justice, Anne Neville's quiet grief, Margaret's relentless struggle, Isabella's dangerous rebellion, Anne Boleyn's tragic fall, Joanna's violent end, Catherine de' Medici's ruthless statecraft, and Blanche's careful, peacemaking hand. Know that every crown was won and kept at immense cost, and that behind every queen's triumph stood the ghosts of those left behind. History often tries to soften these stories, turning blood into ink, grief into legend. But tonight, in the quiet shadow of the past, you see the truth. Every queen walked a path paved with both hope and heartbreak, power and peril, love and loss. Their crowns were never light, and the price they paid echoes still in every stone, every shadow, every midnight memory. Let these stories remind you of the quiet strength required to endure such burdens. the courage to survive in a world where betrayal was as common as prayer and revenge never truly left the halls of power. Let them whisper to you as you drift towards sleep, gentle reminders that even the brightest crowns can cast the darkest shadows. Tonight you carry their memories with you, a gentle, sombre legacy of queens who walked through fire, endured loss, and left behind stories written not just in words, but in the blood and tears of their time. You walk beneath a pale shaft of moonlight, entering the cloistered peace of a medieval nunnery. Stone walls covered in climbing roses, gardens perfumed with lavender and thyme, fountains murmuring quietly in the dark. The world outside falls away as the wooden doors close behind you with a hollow thud. Tonight, you step into the hidden world where disgraced queens, inconvenient widows and failed mothers were quietly sequestered, the retreat of the convent. It's easy, from a distance, to imagine these cloisters as peaceful sanctuaries, places of reflection, prayer, and gentle sisterhood. But for many queens, the nunnery was a gilded cage. To be sent to the Vale was not usually a holy calling, but the final punishment of a world that had no more use for you. Yet even here, the old games of power, alliance, and scandal refused to die. You step softly across uneven flagstones, past wooden doors painted with saints, the faint chime of a bell summoning sisters to prayers. Some of the women here are queens by birth or marriage, their fine gowns replaced by rough habits, their jewels exchanged for rosaries. But under the linen veils and modest cloaks, their old ambitions and heartbreaks remain. Even the quietest nunnery walls have ears and secrets. For some, the convent offered a thin protection from violence. Margaret of Anjou, after the collapse of the Lancastrian cause and the deaths of her husband and son, spent her final years in a nunnery in France. The once mighty she-wolf of France, who had commanded armies and terrified nobles, now lived among nuns, her days filled with prayer and silence. Did she find peace? Or did the walls remind her of all she had lost? She too is remembered with a kind of wary awe. Her presence in the nunnery a warning to others that queenship was never permanent, and exile was just a reversal of fortune away. But not all was prayer and repentance. In many medieval nunneries, the presence of noble women, especially queens, brought wealth, political attention, and sometimes open scandal. Nunneries attached to royal patronage became social centres, places where daughters of nobles were educated, alliances forged, and secret intrigues continued away from the male gaze. Some nunneries became courts in miniature, with abbesses wielding considerable power over land, resources, and even the politics of the region. Abbesses themselves were often of royal blood, cousins, sisters, daughters of kings and queens. These women could become power brokers in their own right, managing vast estates, negotiating with bishops and even monarchs. Some abbesses maintained a courtly lifestyle, patronising poets, overseeing large staffs, even participating in family feuds by letter and quiet influence. The punishment of being cloistered for a particularly cunning queen or noblewoman could become the starting point for a new kind of influence. Still, not all abbesses were angels. The notorious Abbey of Fontevraud, where Eleanor of Aquitaine was later buried, was known for the high birth and fierce independence of its leaders. Rumours abounded of feasting, favouritism, secret lovers smuggled through kitchens at night, even clandestine childbirths. While historians debate the extent of these stories, it is clear that medieval convents were anything but uniformly pious. They were in many ways reflections of the broader world, riddled with ambition, temptation and scandal. Eleanor of Aquitaine herself, after a life of power and imprisonment, spent her last years supporting religious houses, especially those with connections to her own family. It's said she chose her burial place at Fontevraud Abbey deliberately, perhaps to remain among the powerful women she'd admired or competed with all her life. She never truly withdrew from the world. Even as a benefactor, her hand could be felt guiding politics, supporting heirs, and shaping the fate of dynasties. For other queens, the nunnery was an inescapable punishment. Isabel of Hainaut, first wife of Philip II of France, died young after a failed pregnancy. But her fate was almost the fate of many others, to be packed off to a convent for not producing a male heir, shut away while another more fertile queen was sought. This pattern repeated itself throughout Europe. Childless queens, fallen favourites, and outspoken women sent to convents to be forgotten. And yet nunneries could sometimes become unlikely places of resistance. Behind the cloister walls, some queens found the freedom denied them at court. Within the relative privacy of the convent, women could pursue education, debate theology, compose poetry, even write quietly critical letters to former rivals. For some, the religious habit became armour, protection from forced remarriage or further humiliation. Others found sisterhood, solace in daily rituals or the space to grieve and heal away from hostile courts. There were also stories of illicit love, as the hearts of queens and noblewomen did not always surrender to piety. Secret romances bloomed in gardens, or between abbess and visitor, or even among the sisters themselves. Poetry from medieval convents sometimes hints at desires that the church could not quite suppress. The letters of Heloise, the famous abbess and lover of Peter Abelard, show how even a life behind convent walls could not erase passion or longing. Nunneries, then, were never mere places of spiritual withdrawal. They were theatres of ambition, places of exile, and sometimes sanctuaries. A queen might enter as punishment, but could still find ways to wield power through managing estates, forging alliances, or serving as spiritual mothers to generations of noble daughters. Even in death, the fate of queens in convents remained ambiguous. Some were buried with elaborate tombs, their names inscribed in chronicles as models of piety. Others simply vanished, their graves unmarked, their stories little more than rumours preserved in the gossip of later centuries. Historians still debate which queens truly embraced spiritual renewal and which never ceased longing for the world outside. As you pause tonight within these hallowed halls, hear the echo of voices rising softly in the night. Some are prayers for forgiveness, others are laments for lost power, and a few are laughter shared among women who have found, even here, moments of freedom. Imagine the pale moonlight falling through a high window, illuminating a queen bent over a book of hours, her lips moving quietly as she seeks both solace and a remnant of control. The nunnery's silence is never total. It is filled with the memories of queens who refused to be erased, whose stories pressed quietly against the bars of their exile. Some plotted escapes, sending messages hidden in baskets of bread or coded into embroidery. Others brokered peace between rival families, or wrote fiercely argued letters that would one day change the course of history. Tonight, as you drift between sleep and waking, imagine the rustle of linen veils and the quiet steps in candlelit corridors. Remember that for every queen forced behind convent walls, there are 100 stories of resistance, adaptation, and unquiet survival. Not all punishments are absolute. Not all exiles are endings. Even when the world tried to silence these women, their voices found new ways to be heard, sometimes in prayer, sometimes in poetry, sometimes in the subtle turns of fate that would echo through generations. Let the quiet of these cloisters settle around you, not as a grave, but as a gentle hush, reminding you that even in places of retreat, the struggle for dignity, memory, and agency never truly ceases. Tonight you carry these silent, persistent stories with you, lessons in endurance, reinvention, and the quiet rebellions that flicker even in the dimmest of halls. The wind shifts gently as you wander deeper into the labyrinth of the medieval palace. Now turning away from thrones and tapestries, you follow a quieter path, toward the dim-lit chambers where queens were whispered about as healers, hexes, and holy women. Tonight the air tingles faintly with the scent of herbs and candle smoke, and the voices that echo here belong to women who moved between the boundaries of medicine and magic, piety and superstition, always watched, always needed, and always feared. To be a queen in the Middle Ages was to stand in a space of contradiction. At once the paragon of Christian virtue, and, when it suited your enemies, a figure of deep suspicion. If the harvest failed, or plague crept through the villages, it was said the queen's prayers weren't pure enough, or more darkly, that her secret rites had summoned disaster. If a king recovered from illness, it was the queen's blessing. If he worsened, her curse. In this section, you'll walk softly alongside those queens who were at once custodians of healing and accused wielders of unholy power. Picture yourself beside Anne of Bohemia, gentle queen to Richard II, her rooms filled with the scent of dried lavender, rosemary and juniper. Anne was famous for her interest in remedies. Her chambers doubled as an apothecary, where trusted women would steep herbs for teas and poultices. Anne supported midwives, paid for poor women's care, and brought knowledge of continental medicine into England. When the king's fevers broke, Anne's prayers and healing broths were praised in songs. When courtiers fell sick or miscarried, her enemies muttered of dark arts and foreign poisons. Anne's bohemian ways were both lauded and feared. A queen's healing was always suspect, never quite separated from superstition. Historians still argue whether Anne truly introduced new medical practices or simply became a focus for England's anxieties about outsiders and change. But her image, her bundle in hand, gentle voice at a sickbed, simultaneously healer and possible witch, has echoed for centuries. Not every queen wore the healer's mantle willingly. Some, like Catherine de' Medici, found themselves surrounded by accusations as soon as their remedies worked too well. Catherine, ruling France as regent, famously maintained a private laboratory where astrologers, herbalists and alchemists sought ways to cure ailments and predict fate. Her use of perfumes, cosmetic waters, and medicinal powders became the stuff of both legend and slander. It was whispered she could poison as deftly as she could heal, that her spiritual counsellors practiced forbidden rites behind velvet curtains. For queens, even piety could be twisted into suspicion. Margaret of Scotland, later canonised as a saint, was famous for her acts of charity, healing lepers with her own hands, distributing bread, and tending to the sick. But lesser queens, less universally beloved, found their prayers regarded as suspect magic, their charity as calculated spells. Sometimes it was a matter of rumour and timing. When blessings failed, the queen's holiness became a mask for supposed sorcery. But not all queens were mere victims of suspicion. Some wielded spiritual or supernatural authority with confidence. Blanche of Castile, mother and regent to Louis IX of France, was believed to have the king's touch, the ability to heal scrofula and other ailments by prayer and laying on of hands. Blanche's devotion and miracles were public and celebrated, yet even she knew the line between sanctity and sorcery was perilously thin. Only her iron will and political alliances kept whispers at bay. Others, like Isabella of Portugal, consort to John II of Castile, were noted for patronising alchemists and mystics. Isabella herself studied astrology, healing, and the secrets of the stars, delighting in the mystic sciences brought from Andalusia and beyond. Her curiosity was both admired and quietly mocked. When the royal finances dipped, or a noble fell ill, it took little for rumour to claim the Queen's stars were out of favour, or that she'd consulted the wrong spirit. In a world where childbirth was fraught with peril, queens and noblewomen often acted as patrons and protectors of midwives. The royal birthing chamber was a place of both hope and terror. The Queen's touch, her blessing, her prayers, her application of special oils could be the difference between life and death. When babies were born healthy, the Queen was celebrated. When tragedy struck, accusations might swirl of curses, bad omens or hidden resentments. You can almost hear the tense murmurs on nights when labour dragged on too long. Ladies clutching rosaries, midwives exchanging worried glances, the Queen herself whispering prayers over the mother. Sometimes, even the birth of an unlucky child, a sickly heir, a daughter when a son was needed, could fuel rumours of hexes or divine displeasure. Some blamed the Queen's supposed jealousy, or the wrong prayer at the wrong hour. It is here, in the birthing chamber, that medicine and magic blurred. Women of all ranks passed down knowledge of herbs for easing pain, encouraging labour, quelling fevers. Queens, raised among women, carried these secrets, sometimes codified in books, sometimes handed over in hushed conversations. Yet for every grateful mother, there was a courtier ready to mutter that the queen's herbs smelled too foreign, or her prayers were tinged with forbidden words. At the intersection of healing and holiness, queens sometimes performed or oversaw exorcisms and blessings. The mentally ill, then called possessed or afflicted, were often brought before the queen, who would pray or lay hands, invoking saints and angels. Failure to heal was dangerous. Success could be even more so, as the line between blessed and bewitched was gossamer thin. Historians still argue about the limits of a queen's allowed knowledge, how much science was too much before it became sorcery. In England, the legendary Queen Emma, mother of Edward the Confessor, was suspected of using mystical arts to keep her power. Her patronage of clerics and wise women was both admired and feared. All the while, the church watched queens closely. Holy women were lauded when their miracles aligned with doctrine, but a queen who strayed too far into folk remedies or foreign law was at risk. The same actions, anointing with oil, reciting healing prayers, distributing blessed bread, might be hailed as saintly or condemned as heretical, depending on political winds. The most dangerous power a queen could wield, however, was the ability to bless or curse with a word. Some believed the queen's disfavour could blight a crop, wither a noble's fortune, or turn the king's heart cold. Stories circulated of queens who avenged betrayals by invoking ancient curses, or who protected their children with secret rites and amulets sewn into garments. You wander now into a garden, moonlit and fragrant, where a queen and her closest women gather herbs at night. Each plant is named, some to soothe, some to harm, all with double meanings. The queen's knowledge of these plants is both a gift and a burden. Every cure can be recast as poison, every prayer as a curse. Her wisdom is coveted, yet feared, a currency more valuable than gold, but more dangerous than any sword. In rare cases, queens themselves became saints, their healing powers certified by the church and venerated by the people. St. Margaret, remembered for miracles and gentle wisdom, stands as a shining exception to the rule. Most queens were remembered for scandal and suspicion as much as for their care. Tonight, as you rest among these shadowed halls and gardens, hear the quiet conversation of women sharing secrets. Know that each queen who reached for a healing herb or offered a midnight prayer did so with a mixture of hope, courage, and fear. Their hands stitched together the fabric of kingdoms not only with treaties and airs, but with the unseen labour of healing, comforting, and sometimes surviving the suspicion of their own power. Let their stories settle over you like the scent of lavender, reminders that knowledge is double-edged, that compassion can be mistaken for witchcraft, and that even holy women must sometimes defend themselves against whispers in the dark. As sleep overtakes you, carry with you the memory of queens as healers and holy women, brave enough to risk their own safety for the lives of others, wise enough to know when to hold their tongues, and strong enough to endure the fear that always surrounded women who wielded the power to heal. Tonight, you are wrapped in their courage, their wisdom, and their ever-present vulnerability, a gentle legacy that lingers, soft as candlelight and resilient as time beneath your feet. You step into a palace where the air is thick with unfamiliar scents, spices from distant markets, flowers pressed into the folds of a queen's robe, wax from candles shaped by hands that do not speak your tongue. Tonight you walk beside the foreign queens, women carried far from home, crowned in countries where their accents betrayed them, and their customs marked them as outsiders. Their faces are painted on walls and coins, but their hearts often remained divided, caught between the place they left and the world that never quite welcomed them. Every kingdom needed alliances, every alliance needed a bride. For centuries, Europe's crowns traded their daughters across borders as if they were precious cargo, sending a French princess to England, a Sicilian duchess to Hungary, a Spanish infanta to Portugal. It was a political ritual as old as monarchy itself, but for the women at the centre of these transactions, the journey was rarely a fairy tale. To be a foreign queen was to arrive in a storm of hope and suspicion, celebration and doubt. You ride through the city gates, welcomed by banners and bells, crowds pressing forward for a glimpse of the new queen. At your side, interpreters whisper translations, and meaning ladies-in-waiting instruct you on local customs. The wedding is a spectacle. Golden chalices, embroidered gowns, a church filled with incense and song. But the feasting ends, the musicians leave, and suddenly you are very much alone. Your letters from home grow rarer, your accent never softens enough, and your presence at court is both asset and threat. Consider Blanche of Castile, a Spanish princess sent to France to marry Louis VIII. Blanche became a formidable queen, famed for her intelligence and piety, but her Castilian origins were never forgotten. Nobles questioned her loyalty, priests whispered about her foreign influence, and in times of famine or unrest, it was easy to blame the outsider for every ill. Blanche learned to play the part of a good French queen, while never entirely surrendering her Spanish identity. Her private chapel was adorned with images from home, and she sent secret gifts to her family across the Pyrenees. Historians still argue whether Blanche's policies were driven by loyalty to France or secret ambitions for Castile. But what's clear is the precarious balance every foreign queen maintained. Every gesture, what she wore, how she prayed, whom she favoured at court, could be read as evidence of either devotion or treason. Other foreign queens found themselves scapegoated more harshly. Anne of Bohemia, beloved consort of Richard II, was welcomed to England with fanfare, but soon criticised for bringing too many foreigners in her retinue and for supposedly failing to produce an heir. When the realm suffered plague and famine, courtiers muttered that Anne's arrival had upset the natural order, or even that her Bohemian customs had drawn divine displeasure. Anne tried to bridge the gap by patronising English poets and charities, but the shadows of suspicion never fully lifted. Sometimes foreign queens arrived amid open hostility. Isabella of Bavaria, Queen of France, was blamed for disastrous military losses and unpopular treaties with the English. French chroniclers painted her as greedy, vain, even immoral. Her German ways invoked as explanation for every failing. It did not matter that Isabella worked tirelessly for peace, or that she provided much-needed stability during her husband Charles VI's madness. The stigma of foreignness could not be washed away by any amount of virtue. The suspicion wasn't only political, it was deeply personal. Foreign queens were often accused of introducing strange food, questionable fashions, or dangerous ideas. A necklace with an unfamiliar stone could be denounced as an amulet. A dish flavoured with imported saffron was viewed with scepticism. In times of war or famine, the queen's meals and wardrobe became lightning rods for resentment. People whispered that she hoarded luxuries, or that her alien habits brought ill fortune. You pause at a long table set for a royal feast. Before you, unfamiliar fruits and wines are served on heavy platters. The nobles smile politely, but you sense the caution in their eyes. Every bite you take, every compliment you pay to local cooks becomes a test. Are you showing gratitude or secretly longing for home? A single, misplaced word could launch a week of gossip. This tension often spilled into religion. A queen raised in a different rite might be accused of heresy or spiritual arrogance. Some, like Catherine of Aragon, endured years of pressure to prove their faith. Catherine's Spanish Catholicism scrutinized even in the English chapel. Others, like Anne of Kiev, brought Orthodox customs to Catholic France, creating friction with priests and bishops who worried about the pollution of local rites. Every festival became a challenge. Do you insist on observing your own saints' days, or do you let your traditions fade quietly away? Yet not every story is one of triumph. The same power that made a foreign queen valuable could quickly turn her into a scapegoat. In times of crisis, It was the outsider who was blamed for famine, war, or disease. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, led to the persecution of many foreign women at court, rumours swirling that strange queens had brought the plague with them, or that their unfamiliar rituals had offended God. Some foreign queens responded to suspicion by retreating into tight circles of compatriots, fueling more rumours of conspiracy and disloyalty. Others tried to assimilate completely, changing dress, language, and even religious practice in a desperate bid for acceptance. Some walked a narrow path between the two, never fully at home, never fully foreign. It was not only adults who suffered. The children of foreign queens were often caught between worlds, their legitimacy questioned if their mother's origins became inconvenient. If a royal heir was frail, ugly, or simply unlucky, it was whispered that he carried bad blood from his foreign mother's line. You find yourself in a nursery where the queen soothes a crying child with a lullaby from home. The child grows up fluent in 2 tongues, but at court even that gift is viewed with suspicion. Will he grow up to favour his mother's people? Will he understand the true heart of his new kingdom, or always look beyond its borders? Despite these hardships, many foreign queens found ways to exert quiet power. Letters home became lifelines, channels for negotiation, requests for aid, or veiled warnings. Some, like Philippa of Hainaut, queen consort to Edward III, used their family networks to secure alliances and military support. Other foreign queens, like Marie Antoinette centuries later, became the focus of dangerous envy and conspiracy. Their missteps, real or imagined, became fodder for propaganda, their bodies and reputations destroyed by the very people they were sent to bind together. Yet the legacy of these women is more than tragedy. Foreign queens shaped the politics, culture, and even cuisine of their new homes. Their struggle to belong, their ability to adapt, and their subtle resistance to complete assimilation enriched every court they entered. The embroidery on their gowns mixed motifs from 2 worlds. The lullabies they sang to their children became the stuff of new legends. Their quiet perseverance became, in time, the rootstock for dynasties that would change the world. As you walk through this palace tonight, you hear the soft rustle of silk and the murmur of many languages in the halls. You pass a queen at prayer, her fingers moving over beads carved in a distant land. You see her writing a letter, each word a careful balancing act between loyalty to her birth and duty to her crown. You sense the loneliness of exile, but also the creative power of someone who stands between 2 worlds and finds a way to claim both as her own. Let these stories remind you that every outsider's journey is both hardship and opportunity, that being foreign means learning to thrive amid suspicion and change. The world of medieval queens is richer, stranger, and more interconnected than the official histories suggest. And in every court, some foreign queen was dreaming, plotting, and quietly reshaping the kingdom around her. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the distant music of 2 cultures weaving together, new harmonies rising from old dissonance. Let the perseverance of these foreign queens inspire your own strength, and their adaptability give you comfort wherever you feel far from home. Tonight you carry with you their stories, tales of loss, endurance, quiet victory, and the ever-unfolding miracle of belonging in a world determined to call you strange. You wander through a palace, not in the grandeur of a throne room or the hush of a royal chapel, but along quieter galleries, stone corridors hung with heavy tapestries, their colours faded, the images mysterious. It is here, amid the slow work of hands unseen and the silent weaving of secrets into cloth, that another side of queenship emerges, treason stitched in silk, rebellion sewn into linen, resistance that never raised a sword but still left a mark on history. Tonight, you walk alongside queens who mastered the subtle art of survival. These women understood that in a world where every word was watched, every letter could be intercepted, and every movement spied upon, power sometimes lay in what was hidden, not what was spoken aloud. In a palace where loud defiance meant swift ruin, a queen learned to rebel quietly, with a needle, a loom, a coded message stitched into a gift, or a look exchanged across a tapestry frame. The art of needlework, often dismissed as mere women's labour, was in truth a world of coded language and covert solidarity. Queens and noble women spent hours together in sewing circles, their hands moving swiftly while their tongues flickered with rumours, worries, and plans. Here, safe from most male ears, women could confide in one another, offer warnings, and share news, sometimes disguised as simple advice about thread or colour, sometimes couched in poetry or parable. It was a world of patience and precision, where every choice was weighed for meaning. Consider Mary, Queen of Scots, one of history's most famous prisoners, whose years of captivity in England were spent not only in prayer and sorrow, but in constant secret communication. Deprived of most freedoms, Mary turned to embroidery as both solace and weapon. Her tapestries and needlework, filled with personal emblems and hidden references, became a way to signal her ongoing claim to power. It is said that Mary exchanged stitched handkerchiefs and gifts with her supporters, sometimes including tiny, almost invisible codes. She was watched, her correspondence intercepted, but her needle could slip past suspicion where a pen might not. Historians still argue whether Mary's sewing circles were the true heart of her resistance, or whether her hand-stitched emblems were merely a queen's lonely pastime. But the women who gathered around her, maids, secretaries, allies, kept alive the hope of escape, the possibility of a future restored. The Queen's room was never as silent as it seemed. It was not just Mary who turned to silent arts. Throughout Europe, queens and their trusted companions wove their intentions into the very fabric of court life. A gift of linen or lace might carry a message, certain flowers symbolizing loyalty, certain animals meaning defiance, a pattern that recalled a secret meeting or a promise made. In times of war or suspicion, even a motif as simple as a vine or a lion could be loaded with meaning. A call for rescue, a claim to heritage, a promise of return. Needlework was also a means of keeping secrets alive when open speech would be dangerous. In England, during the Tudor and Stuart periods, Catholic queens and their supporters used embroidery to signal secret faith. White lilies for the Virgin Mary, red roses for martyrs, patterns from banned prayer books hidden in altar cloths or even clothing linings. Some historians believe that secret masses were celebrated on embroidered cloths that looked to the casual observer like simple table linen. Queens who did not sew themselves often commissioned works that sent coded messages to supporters or rivals. A tapestry hung behind a throne, a cushion gifted to a visiting noble, a banner carried in procession. These objects, visible to all, became part of the language of diplomacy and defiance. For example, Elizabeth I's court was filled with allegorical imagery: phoenixes, pelicans, Tudor roses. To her supporters, these were signs of the Queen's undying hope, her willingness to sacrifice for her people, her divine right. To her enemies, perhaps, they were warnings cloaked in beauty. Sometimes, rebellion was even more literal. Queens used sewing circles as covers for political organising, planning clandestine meetings, distributing forbidden texts, and raising funds for allies in exile. In France, during the Wars of Religion, Catherine de' Medici's apartments became gathering places for women sympathetic to Catholic causes, where veiled warnings and offers of help were exchanged while hands seemed only to be occupied with stitching gowns or tablecloths. But resistance was not always organised or grand. Sometimes, it was the simple act of remembering a loved one who had been sent to the scaffold, or of preserving a family motto in a piece of needlework when all other records had been destroyed. In times of great danger, a queen might embroider her prayers into the hem of a dress, trusting that God would read what no one else could see. The line between loyalty and treason was often thin, and queens risked everything by weaving their secrets. If a rival or spy discovered a hidden code, the punishment could be swift and terrible: imprisonment, exile, or even death. The story of Lady Jane Grey, England's 9 Days Queen, is a warning. Her letters and needlework, found after her downfall, became evidence against her and her supporters. Yet even in the tower, Jane continued to sew, leaving behind words of hope and faith stitched into her handkerchief. You pause before a tapestry, its surface shimmering with the labour of months or years. The scene it depicts, a hunt, a banquet, a coronation, may hold a second meaning. Perhaps a particular animal stands for a friend in exile, a star for a secret hope. You imagine the queen sitting by the window as dusk falls, her fingers moving swiftly, her mind racing with the need to stay one step ahead of those who would see her undone. Sometimes, the art of hidden resistance extended into other crafts. Queens and their women decorated books with miniature paintings, tiny symbols or even full verses written in invisible ink. They composed poetry and songs filled with double meanings. They sent gifts to allies, a locket holding a portrait, a prayer book with a pressed flower between its pages, a pair of gloves perfumed with a scent recognizable only to the right recipient. Resistance could also be an act of remembering. Queens who survived the loss of children, husbands, or kingdoms often became the keepers of family memory, preserving stories, genealogies, or sacred objects in secret. In some convents, exiled queens spent their days copying texts, illuminating manuscripts with secret prayers for their family's return to favour. In these quiet acts, resistance was an act of faith as much as of politics. The world of hidden queens was also a world of risk. Every trusted attendant might turn out to be a spy, every whispered conversation might reach the wrong ears. Yet still, queens persisted, because to give up hope, to stop sending messages or remembering lost kin, was to surrender entirely to those who wished to erase them. The smallest acts of resistance, one stitch, one flower, one whispered promise, became a lifeline in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, not every act of rebellion led to rescue or restoration. Many queens died in exile, their secrets buried with them, but their tapestries and poems, their letters and needlework sometimes survived, evidence of a courage that could not be stamped out by prisons or silence. Centuries later, historians and artists have uncovered these traces, a name stitched into a hem, a poem scrawled in a prayer book, a design on a banner carried into battle. As you wander the halls tonight, the weight of these quiet acts surrounds you. Not the clash of swords or the roar of crowds, but the soft persistence of hands creating meaning from threat, loyalty from exile, hope from despair. Imagine a queen at her embroidery frame, knowing that the fate of a kingdom might rest on her ability to sow a secret without a word. Let these stories remind you that power is not always loud, that resistance can take the form of beauty and patience as much as violence or protest. In every kingdom, there have been women who endured, remembered, and rebelled. Not in open war, but in the silent language of their hands. As you drift into sleep tonight, feel the comfort of cloth against your skin, the sense of stories being woven just for you. Remember that every tapestry, every song, every hidden stitch is an act of love, loyalty, and courage, silent, persistent, and impossible to erase. Tonight, you carry with you the legacy of queens who resisted quietly, the ones who sewed treason into linen, love into tapestries, and hope into every secret act. You walk along a corridor where sunlight never quite reaches, feeling the cold seep through the thick walls, the weight of centuries pressing down with every step. You are deep in the oldest part of the palace now, where the whispers of lost queens are almost audible, where the shadows are filled with stories of downfall. Here, behind these heavy doors and beside these barred windows, you find the cruelest fate a queen could face, the crown's final punishment. History remembers many queens as beloved, powerful, or tragic, but some are remembered, if at all, as victims of a punishment harsher than death. To be cast down from a throne was never a gentle descent. Sometimes it ended with a single sword stroke, a head tumbling into a basket, or a hurried execution at dawn. Other times, it meant years of exile, forced confinement, or slow, deliberate erasure from memory. The stories of these punished queens remind you that the higher the crown sits, the farther there is to fall. Imagine, for a moment, a queen standing in a stone chamber, her jewels stripped away, her fine clothes replaced by rough linen. She waits, heart pounding, for the footsteps of the men who will announce her fate. Outside, the world she shaped with her hands, alliances, children, even the garden she planted is slipping away. She's no longer your majesty, she's simply a prisoner. But not all final punishments were so visible. For many queens, the end came quietly, behind convent walls or in remote castles, out of sight and out of mind. Catherine Howard, another of Henry's ill-fated wives, was executed for adultery at barely 20, her story echoing Anne's in its cruelty and speed. Others, like Catherine of Aragon, spent years in forced exile, removed from court, separated from their children, denied even the comfort of friends or familiar servants. Catherine's crime was refusing to yield her title as queen, her dignity undiminished even in solitude. Some queens faced punishments more ambiguous, their lives ending in obscurity rather than violence. Isabella of France, who helped depose her husband Edward II, eventually found herself under effective house arrest when her son Edward III asserted his own authority. Isabella, once called the she-wolf of France, ended her days quietly, her political power spent, her legend already turning into myth. There were queens whose punishments extended to their families, children disinherited or imprisoned, loyal attendants executed or exiled. In the brutal calculus of medieval politics, erasing a queen sometimes meant erasing an entire network. Margaret of Anjou, after years of war and loss, spent her last years in near poverty in France, her only surviving son killed in battle, her supporters scattered or dead. Even those who survived sometimes faced a punishment more subtle, forgetting. To be written out of the chronicles, to have your portrait painted over, your name struck from prayers and official documents, this was a death of memory, an erasure that could last longer than the grave. Some queens, once powerful and visible, are now little more than a footnote in history books, their stories pieced together from scraps of gossip and surviving letters. The mechanisms of royal punishment were varied and ingenious. Some queens were accused of witchcraft or heresy, convenient charges for those who needed them removed. Joan of Navarre, imprisoned by her stepson on suspicion of sorcery, was only released after years of protest and negotiation. Others were blamed for disasters, droughts, defeats, even outbreaks of plague. To be a queen was to be a scapegoat for a nation's grief or anger. Historians still debate whether some queens deserved their fates. Were they truly traitors, or simply too powerful for comfort? The records are never impartial. Chronicles written by the victors demonize the deposed. Letters from supporters turn them into martyrs. The truth, as always, is more complicated, a tangle of personalities, politics, and the ever-present danger of being a woman with too much influence. For every famous case, there are dozens more half lost to time. Consider Isabella of Angoulême, mother of Henry III. Widowed young, she returned to her native France, where her ambitions led to conflict with local lords. She was accused of plotting murder, of inciting rebellion, and eventually excommunicated. She died in obscurity, her reputation blackened by years of accusation. Others, like Elizabeth Woodville, outlived their crowns but never quite escaped the shadow of suspicion. After her husband Edward IV's death, Elizabeth was briefly the most powerful woman in England, but when her son was deposed by Richard III, she was sent to a convent. Her daughters married off or hidden, her own name fading from public record. Punishment could even be psychological. The isolation of confinement, the uncertainty of exile, the humiliation of forced confessions and public repentance, all were tools used to break queens without bloodshed. Letters from imprisoned queens are filled with pleas for contact, for news of children, for the simple dignity of being remembered. Their loneliness is almost palpable across the centuries. Yet not all queens went quietly. Some turned their punishment into a final act of resistance. Anne of Brittany, forced to marry 2 successive French kings and repeatedly give up her native duchy, spent her final years fighting for Breton independence, signing secret treaties and patronising Breton culture, even from within her gilded cage. Her legacy is celebrated in Brittany to this day, a reminder that even defeated queens can shape the world after them. Others found quiet ways to assert themselves, supporting convents, writing letters, commissioning works of art, or simply refusing to recant their beliefs. For some, the act of survival itself became a statement. To persist, to keep writing, praying, or defending their children, was to deny their enemies a total victory. Tonight, as you wander these shadowed corridors, you feel the cold touch of loss, but also the ember of resistance that outlives every fall from grace. The stories of punished queens are not just tales of defeat, they are lessons in resilience, reminders that even at their lowest these women could inspire loyalty, hope, and sometimes change. In the silence of a cell or the quiet of a distant convent, in the prayers whispered for lost children or the stubborn refusal to sign a false confession, the punished queen is never truly powerless. Her legacy is written in the hearts of those who remember, in the laws changed by her downfall, and in the quiet courage of those who come after. As you prepare for sleep tonight, let the echoes of these lost queens remind you that dignity can persist even in exile, that memory is a form of resistance, and that every ending is also the beginning of a new story. Tonight, you carry with you the whispered legacies of queens who endured the crown's final punishment, some broken, some defiant, none truly erased. The hour is late now, the palace transformed by shadows and moonlight, the bustling noise of courtiers replaced by a hush so deep it seems the stones themselves are dreaming. You wander a last winding path through the chambers, libraries and echoing halls where queens once walked, fought, wept and plotted. You have seen the heights of their power, the depths of their loneliness, the dangers of their secrets. But in this final turn, you begin to see something subtler and stranger. The quiet afterlives of queens, how their stories refused to end, how their names and legends haunted the centuries long after the last candle guttered out. It's easy to think of queens as figures frozen in time, faces on coins, names in chronicles, their stories ending abruptly with a fall from grace, a scaffold, or the closing of a convent door. Yet history is never truly finished with a queen. Sometimes it takes generations for her truth to surface, for her image to shift from villain to victim, sinner to saint, forgotten to beloved. Tonight you walk through the tapestry of memory itself, watching how these women's legacies change, fade and return, how the world keeps asking again and again who they really were. You begin in a musty library where the air tastes of old parchment and beeswax. Here, historians and poets have argued for centuries. Was Anne Boleyn a temptress or a martyr? Was Isabella of France a monster or a liberator? Was Eleanor of Aquitaine a scandal, a genius, or simply a survivor? Each generation finds new clues, reads the old letters with different eyes, stitches new meaning into the gaps that time has left. Imagine the historian's lamp burning through the night, casting a halo over documents long neglected. A faded letter, a scrap of embroidery, a line in a forgotten diary. These fragments breathe new life into stories once believed closed. Sometimes it is only in hindsight that a queen's suffering becomes clear, or her resistance is finally honoured. Sometimes the truth is forever ambiguous, each answer opening new mysteries. Consider the afterlife of Catherine de' Medici's reputation. In her own time, Catherine was blamed for poisonings, for the massacre of innocents, for every shadow that fell across France. For centuries, she was cast as the Black Queen, an Italian sorceress manipulating weak kings. Only recently have historians begun to see her as a shrewd survivor, a woman fighting to protect her children, her country and herself in a time when mercy was rarely possible. The same actions that once earned her scorn are now seen as desperate courage, clever statecraft, or even tragic necessity. Mary, Queen of Scots too, is a lesson in historical afterlife. Vilified in her own lifetime, slandered as a seductress and a traitor, she was executed as a threat to the English crown. Yet within a generation, Mary became a romantic heroine. Her letters, poetry, and tragic story inspiring novels, paintings, and even political uprisings. Each era has remade Mary in its own image, a saint, a sinner, a victim, a rebel. The memory of foreign queens, once resented as interlopers, sometimes softens with time. Philippa of Hainaut, mocked for her accent and manner at first, was mourned deeply by the English people at her death. Her charity and kindness remembered long after the suspicions faded. Queens who were once scapegoats for famine, plague, or war become, in memory, mothers of nations, patronesses of churches and hospitals, symbols of hope or endurance. But the afterlife of a queen's story isn't just in history books. It lingers in popular imagination, in fairy tales, operas, films, and television. Anne Boleyn's ghost is said to haunt the Tower of London, carrying her head beneath her arm, forever restless. Catherine Howard is sometimes seen on cold winter nights, running barefoot along the gallery, still pleading for mercy centuries after her death. Mary, Queen of Scots, is said to sing in ruined castles, her song drifting over the moors. These hauntings are not just superstitions, they are echoes of unresolved grief, national guilt, or unforgotten injustice. In other places, queens are remembered as saints. Margaret of Scotland's healing, Blanche of Castile's piety, and even the wisdom of lesser-known abbesses linger in folk prayers, local feasts, and the dedications of tiny chapels. Sometimes women who were once condemned for ambition or defiance are later canonized as martyrs to the cause of faith, family, or justice. You walk into a gallery where portraits line the walls, painted and repainted across centuries. The same queen's face shifts, sometimes demonized, sometimes idealized, sometimes reimagined entirely to serve the purposes of the day. A revolutionary queen becomes a tyrant in one era, a feminist icon in another. Her story is retold for every new anxiety and every new hope. The stories of punished queens, their exiles, imprisonments, and executions are retold generation by generation as cautionary tales, as inspiration, or simply as mysteries. Eleanor of Aquitaine's long life, with its wars, betrayals, and reconciliations, is the stuff of novels and legend. Even queens who truly were guilty of treason, murder, or betrayal often become, with the passage of time, figures of empathy. She had no other choice, yet people say, or she was trapped by her times. Some afterlives are quieter, the names of queens written in church records, the prayers said at their tombs, the schools and hospitals they endowed. These leave their own kind of ghost, gentle and persistent. Sometimes a single embroidered cloth, a book of hours, or a foundation charter survives the centuries, outlasting the scandals and the violence, a silent testimony to a life lived under impossible pressure. You notice as you walk these halls that the legacy of a queen is rarely her own to control. Kings have monuments and battles. Queens are remembered in rumours, letters, and the stories of those who knew them. Their reputations depend on the whims of chroniclers, the survival of documents, the fashions of memory. Yet, in this vulnerability, there is also a strange resilience. Queens re-emerge whenever the world needs to remember that strength can be subtle, that resistance can be quiet, that power has many forms. Sometimes, a queen's greatest act of legacy is the survival of her children, dynasties born out of love, luck, or pure stubbornness. The line of English monarchs owes much to the patient plotting of Margaret Beaufort, the Tudor matriarch who survived war, loss, and danger to see her son crowned. The Habsburgs, the Valois, the Capetians, and countless other houses owed their future to queens who endured, adapted, and outlasted the enemies around them. At other times, the queen's afterlife is in culture, her patronage of artists, her encouragement of poets, her founding of convents, her influence on language and taste. The songs Eleanor of Aquitaine brought from Provence shaped the courts of Europe. The art collections of Catherine de' Medici, Anne of Brittany, and Isabella of Castile helped birth the Renaissance in new lands. Even their flaws, extravagance, ambition, stubbornness, became part of their legacy, warnings as well as inspirations. And so, as you come to the end of this long, wandering journey, you understand that the sinful secrets of medieval queens were never only their own. Their lives were lived in the gaze of the world, their fates tied to the fortunes of kingdoms, their secrets both shield and sword. They were daughters, wives, mothers, prisoners, rebels, saints, and, above all, survivors. History cannot truly end their stories. For every lost letter discovered, every rumour re-examined, every myth retold, a queen's voice rises again from the silence, asking to be seen not just as a sinner or a saint, but as a person, flawed, brave, clever, lonely and unforgettable. You pause at the window looking out over the palace gardens, where the moon still glows softly on old stones and tangled roses. Somewhere below, the echo of laughter and weeping, the clatter of armour and the hush of prayer still lingers. The world outside may have changed, but within these walls the stories of queens never truly die. Let their afterlives remind you that your story too will change in the memories of those who follow. That dignity, hope, love, and the courage to endure are never wasted, no matter how quietly they are lived. So now the candles are nearly out, and the hush of the old palace is softer than ever, as if centuries of secrets are settling to sleep along with you. You've wandered through the lives and legends of queens who wore crowns of gold and of sorrow, who kept secrets, loved dangerously, and sometimes paid dearly for it. You have seen them as they truly were, not only symbols in history books, but living, breathing souls, tender, fierce, fearful, sometimes forgiven, sometimes forever misunderstood. Tonight let your mind drift through the gentle darkness, tracing the quiet threads of courage and vulnerability that connect you to these women long gone. With every slow breath, imagine the weight of their crowns falling away, replaced by the gentle warmth of memory, a comfort that lingers, safe and soft, through the longest night. Whatever burdens you carry, whatever secrets or longings fill your own heart, know that you too are part of a story far larger than yourself. The queens you've travelled with remind you that every struggle leaves a mark, but every act of endurance, every moment of kindness or defiance, adds a glimmer to the story that will someday be told about you. So rest easy now. Let your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench. Let the last sounds of history's echoes lull you. The world is wide, and morning will come gently, bringing a new page to your story. Thank you for sharing this long, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. Sweet dreams.